longtime colleague and friend at the same department, finance and management. And thank you, Huan, for your time. So Huan actually is currently reader in international management at SOAS, University of London. And she got her PhD degree from Manchester Business School in international business. And she actually, her current interest, the research interest, covers quite many different subtopics, such as international entrepreneurship and sustainable entrepreneurship, economic development, and the implication of climate change for international business. Very interesting. As you can see that Huan actually is very active. So she got quite a few projects. Some projects she led, for example, she actually is the principal investor for a grant funded by British Academy Mid-Career Fellowship. We all know this. And she was actually involved in some other international projects on climate change, for example, sustainable development, and those are funded by different organizations, including EPSRC, the Newton Fund, the Royal Academy of Engineering, and the UFCO. So that's something that Huan was very active, I think, for some years. And as you can see that she has published in top journals such as the Journal of Business Venture and Journal of World Business. I think that's she is also sitting on some editorial board. For example, two journals that for IB people, they are very familiar with those two, International Business Review and Management and Organization Review. It's very nice, concise, your profile. So as you can see, the title is more international than finance, but I think now interdisciplinary connections are very important. So I really like this topic, global mindset and learning outcomes in Chinese multinational enterprises. And I think two other factors are networking and market type. Huan, please, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Huan. It's really a great honor to be here because I've been always actually listening to fantastic research and the talk in the center. So today is my turn to humbly introduce one of the papers that I co-authored with Eunice and Ying in Asia. I mean, Huan just actually had a long introduction, but I would like to think about currently I'm more interested in about these kinds of internationalization of Chinese firms, but also to look into more specifically into Africa. So I think this is why, this center really offers a great platform and opportunity for knowledge exchange across the different institutions and among the colleagues and the practitioners. So I really appreciate this opportunity. Like Huan just mentioned, is like this topic is not really finance, not really Africa focused, but I hope it will actually still have some implications for us to think about Chinese investment outside of China, and especially to look into how they behave and then what they can improve in terms of their strategic motivation and also their operations and so on and so forth. So as the title has already identified, there are certain kinds of keywords like global mindset, learning outcome, and networking and the market type. So it won't be a quite surprise to you guys and that in the following 35, 40 minutes that we will come back with those kind of constructs and concepts a couple of times. And if you do have any questions during the presentation, do feel free to ask. I'll try to, or Huan can help with the questions. Or alternatively, I'm also very happy to listen to your comments and also your advice at the end of the presentation. So either way, I'm fine with that. So, I mean, over the past decades, we definitely have seen those kinds of fantastic faster growth of Chinese multinational firms. So we're talking about the government push a lot, and especially those kinds of government policy really drive the internationalization of the Chinese multinationals in the early 20s, because this is kind of like, let's go outside. But over the past decades, we also have seen that Chinese firms are very diversified in terms of their international approach, why they want to go international and how they internationalize, and especially the consequence of their international performance. So in this slide, you can see to the left side, this is the latest report by Kantar Brown, and they almost publish those kinds of top brands across the globe, and they particularly look into those top 50 global brands owned on or possessed by the Chinese firms. We are not surprised with certain kinds of really high profile brands under this media sport, and also frequently on the debate in even political arena regarding the threat that Chinese multinational firms cause, but also a very astonishing factor that they actually operate in quite a diverse and quite a number of different industry sectors. So here we can see the ByteDance, Xiaomi, and Shein definitely are the leading in this particular list, showing case the very, very kinds like new promising Chinese brands in entertainment, electronics, and the fashion sectors. But we also have very traditional, a little bit, long-standing firms and brands like Lenovo, which acquired the IBM PC department almost 30 years ago, right, by 1998. So, and then Huawei and AliExpress. So this actually compared with ByteDance, Xiaomi, and Shein, they're pretty actually kinds, not really old, but more sophisticated in innovation in their own tech and e-commerce industries in China, but also actually expand their internationalization operations overseas. So in this particular top 50 global brands, we can see those brands normally dominating the smart devices, automobiles, and also the digital economy. And then, of course, those are the three key industries that we also have witnessed the fastest brand power growth. And this is because China really built up over the past decades this kind of economic system for entrepreneurial innovation, for the industrial development. So that's why these kinds of internal domestic market and the support both at the government level and the market level provide those kind of Chinese firms really great competitive edge to compete in international markets. So if we move to the right side, actually this is from the latest 2024 Global Fortune 500. And then again, it will be very interesting to look into, how long they have been on the list. And some actually are large state-owned enterprises like Bank of China and COFCO, because they pretty much actually maintain their presence on the Global Fortune 500 list for almost 30 years. And so they are long-standing history in terms of their state ownership, international exposure, and also their very established performance as well. But it's more interesting to see that there are newcomers, right? Those kinds of new entrants join the list, especially at the lower side. They actually are from those kinds of high-tech industries that we're talking about, quite similar to see the pattern on the left side here. So there's three companies just enter this very phenomenon list, including Pinduoduo, PDD, Hangzhou Industry Investment, and the Cherry. So they made their list for the first time last year. And then we also have seen that companies like PDD has been making waves globally with their international digital platform Temu. So especially, I'm not quite sure how many people in the UK actually use Temu, but definitely they penetrated the international market very aggressively with their competitive advantage. Some people would argue because they have this kind of low cost of operation, so that's why they can offer cheaper prices. But behind that, all the digital economy really needs this kind of technological innovation in order to actually meet the challenge to become the e-commerce giants. So it's not just saying that we offer the cheap products, it's all about how actually they really provide innovative competitive edge in terms of operation, logistics, supply chain, so on and so forth, to be successfully compete in international markets. So the reason when I put those kinds of figures here is to give a certain kinds of view about, those individual Chinese multinational firms. They do vary a lot in terms of their industry scope, in terms of their age of internationalization, but also the way actually they do share a common ground is that they emphasize a lot on innovation. And where is innovation coming from? Definitely coming from the organization ecosystem, coming from, partnering with the right people and peer. But most important thing is they learn a lot. They try to learn how to compete, not just domestically, but also internationally. So this actually provides us the rationale and then really motivate us the interest to look into, why the Chinese multinational firms, after those 2 decades, let's put this way, they have been in such a very important role in international operation, and then how this unprecedented phenomenon actually try to raise the question is that, how these latecomers, right, become fast learners and lead in innovation over the past decade. So this is pretty much where we come from and why we want to initiate this research by looking into those Chinese multinational firms. So if we look at IB literature, this is where I come from. So I'm really traditional international business scholar. So we start to look into the literature. To be honest, the phenomenon of Chinese multinational firms together with the emerging economy multinational firms, we do have a very substantial stock of knowledge over the last 20 years. Scholars like Luo Yadong and then Mike Peng, so they all very distinctive academia, try to understand and try to explain, whether there's certain kinds of uniqueness about Chinese multinational firms. Do they actually behave very differently or distinctively from the advanced economy multinational firms? And the most important thing is why they go international and then how they really do in international market. So we look into the different literature, but focus on emerging economy, multinational firm studies. So this is quite a particular stream about it. So when Luo and Tom talking about, why Chinese firms can go and do well, they talk about a springboard perspective. And they talk about they really rely on those kind of home advantage. Because if we look at emerging economies, yes, there might be certain kinds of issues with institutional framework, the voice, and the less sophisticated industry structure, so on and so forth over the past, okay, not at the moment, I would say. So they would argue that they normally would leapfrog and they would actually present themselves in a more aggressive way in international market. So it's not surprising we see lots of merger acquisitions did take place because this is the fastest way to be there overseas. So Luo and Tom actually particularly talking about this kind of springboard motivation and also perspective. And then they do argue, learning actually take place in the domestic market because they do actually have the advantage and have the experience in managing complicated institutional and market environment in emerging economies. So when they go overseas, it's quite likely that they can transfer those kinds of knowledge in their new environment. Okay, there are certain kinds of debate saying whether this is really transferable or whether this kinds of transferable could be very effective. So there are different, studies talking about it. But overall, we do believe that springboard perspective provide the perspective to consider when Chinese multinational firms go international markets, they really have the intention to be better and to be more innovative and to learn more. Then this actually looking to, where the learning take place, right? How the organization learning really can be implemented, let's put it this way. So lots of scholars talking about various learning mechanisms that contribute to positive knowledge spillover to Chinese multinational firms and other emerging economy multinational firms. So one of the argument or assumption is that as a latecomer, you do actually primary kids compared with a senior school. So you do have those kinds of limited knowledge stock. You may not know well about the rules of the game. So there's quite a huge space for you to pick up learning and try to shorten the learning curve. So where these kinds of learning opportunities coming from? Yes, one way is to acquire, right? So acquiring advanced knowledge asset from your partnership. This is a very important, not just for emerging economy firms, but also for any firms going international, because you need to be deeply rooted in the local market. You need to understand what the local market needs. And then who's going to be the best teacher to teach you that? Local partners. So they actually perform one of the best introductory platform for you to think about where we can acquire those kind of advanced knowledge assets. And this is particularly true if we actually trace back 20 years ago when Chinese firms started to internationalize, because, back that time, high tech, those kinds of knowledge know-hows were not there yet within their own corporations. So they learn a lot from the foreign firms through the partnership. The second one is to think about the headquarter and the subsidiary linkages. And this is what we see the dynamic evolution of Chinese multinational firms over years. So in the traditional literature, we talk a lot about knowledge flows between the headquarter and the subsidiary, either, the one-way direction or two-way directions. And when we see Chinese firms are more actually active in international markets, they literally also establish these kinds of internal system to connect the headquarters based in China and also subsidiaries across the world. And then this is very good option to actually access to the local knowledge on their own, which they can internalize. So this is different from the partnership because you have to externalize the knowledge, but within the headquarters and the subsidiary linkage, so you internalize, which help the Chinese multinational firms to catch up and even become innovation leaders in international markets. So when we're talking about learning mechanism, we can see there are two ways. One is more internal, one is external. But if we're looking to the different dimensions, the learning can also take place, in individual level and organizational level. So this is what we're talking about, the individual level, more about whether you have the intention, the intention and then the inspiration to go outside and then to learn more. So when we try to understand, okay, there is a learning that should have taken place, and then Chinese firms, if they want to do well in overseas market, they should really keep the learning as a priority. But then the question is, the diversity and the complexity of the learning and the network behavior really link to what do you think you want to achieve. This kind of strategic intention or motivation and to internationalize. So like I mentioned that previous slides, is there different ways about, why we want to go international and what can it contribute to? Really depends on this kind of motivation to think about when, where, and how to compete. And then this is very important because it also linked to the process of internationalization and organizational learning to deliver long-term competitive advantage. Now, while we talk a lot, and when we dig into the literature, we find a lot about this kind of organizational level analysis. We talk a lot what the ownership the company has, no matter it is Chinese firms or any British firms or the American firms. The ownership itself has been a very important core element for any firms to go international. But then while we're talking about ownership itself, we have to take a step back and thinking about this ownership really need to be materialized. And then to materialize that, you do need the idea where you want to be. So if we take the case of BYD, and so the full name of BYD is Build Your Dreams. But most of the time that we do not mention Build Your Dream because it actually had this kind of deep imprint in the company itself. So when I look at back and also interviewed with the managers there, and they say, we do have this kind of intention is that we want to stand out from the crowd and offer the best possible experience for consumers in Europe, in America. So from this kind of statement, we can see, the idea to be distinctive, to be outstanding in the global market, really push the learning and to take place in a more effective way, especially in the case of BYD. So here, then we think about, okay, we would like to know how this kind of mindset really push the internationalization of the firm and their learning. So that actually, draw from the literature, talking a lot about why Chinese firms go international, what they have learned, and how they have learned, but we would like to see what really certain kinds of missing puzzle there to look into this kind of global mindset. It actually go a little bit beyond and saying, oh, we want to go there for the resources. We want to go there for the knowledge. We want to go there for the consumers. No, global mindset actually really try to build in a more hierarchical way and to think we want to be internationally outstanding and excellent. So this is the concept that we would like to look into. So actually, there are conceptual review about the global mindset, but the concept itself, the construct, the conceptualization, the measurement are still quite messy at the moment, because when talking about global mindset, because of the mindset, people always link that to individuals, to look into the cognitive, what they think, right? And then, how they really think about, how to identify and how to make sense making in terms of learning opportunities. So it's a quite individual, personal take to think about, okay, this is the mindset, in a very kind of individual level to look into what they can do in international market. And then no surprise, it is always used in the international human resource scholars because they want to look into the top management team and to certain kinds of very high level managers or entrepreneurs, and to think about how they personally think there is a market there's a scope to be successful over the international markets. But if we look into more traditional strategy and business concept, the global mindset also should be linked within the organization itself. It should actually have a better match according to the strategic innovation, but also the organizational structure. So we're always talking about when you have a strategic vision, it doesn't mean it automatically delivers to the success, because you really need to have a structured and a systematic framework, mechanism, and even the monitoring system to make sure that the strategy is not just actually certain kinds of fuzzy words. It needs to be implemented and materialized. So the global mindset, if we talk at organizational level, we emphasize a lot the fit between the strategic vision, so where we want to be, together with the organizational structure and process, and saying how we can deliver it. And so in this kind of a sense that it really can capture and sustain the global competitive advantage. So global mindset in this case emphasize a lot about the strategic importance in facilitating learning for Chinese multinationals or any firms, but at the same time, it also looking into, how these kinds of structures should be there or should be set up. And then if we're looking at particular specific or one dimension of this kind of process, that's the networking. That's actually back to the stream of emerging economy firms emphasize a lot those kinds of partnership and network capabilities. So here we're talking about networking is very important because it actually opened the door to the right partner to think about what types of knowledge, what types of learning opportunities you would like to grasp. So here, in this picture, I try to provide the overview about, there are two main concepts in our research. One is the global mindset that we drew from the multi-level aspect. We do not deny the individual level because the managerial perception actually is very important. And especially we think about large multinational firms from China, those kinds of strategic decision possessed by individuals at the top level really can make things happen, right? This is quite different from other countries. And then at the same time, the organization itself, when they become more mature and more sophisticated, so they know that how they can really put all the things together and the connecting dots in order to deliver the strategic vision to reality. Then apart from the global mindset, the networking, as I mentioned, that is very important to think about who you would like to work with, line up, and then what you want to get out of networking. So networking actually is different from networks per se, because networks are the relationships you have. But networking is that you exploit the network linkages in order to get the value that or certain kinds of benefits you want. So this concept really shows what exactly the learning and also the networking actually try to work together. So overall, the research question here is we would like to see how and why different types of networking can lead to better learning performance for Chinese multinational firms. I'll explain a little bit here later in the next slides, but here it's very important to emphasize the reason why we want to look into the different types of networking, because we acknowledge that the diversity and also the complex networks and the linkages Chinese firms have. So we have the organizational level, but we also have those kinds of social capital level, which depend on individuals and personal relationship. So this is basically what we want to look into, the differences between the two, and to see where the learning really take place and in a more effective way. I think it's that from IB perspective, we emphasize a lot on the theoretical background in order to deliver the hypothesis. Because like I mentioned, there is quite a lot over there regarding how scholars do consider the phenomenon of emerging economy firms, in addition to the conventional theoretical explanations on why and how firms perform in international markets. So in this particular paper that we draw two main theoretical perspectives. The first one is the organizational learning. The reason why organizational learning actually is important because, like I mentioned, that the real case, right? Like PDD, like BYD, and ByteDance, they're all very innovative. They either lead markets as a latecomers, or they change the way how fast and then how important this kind of upgrading of technology should be there to the international consumers and also competitors. So here is that we emphasize a lot about learning because learning played a very important role, especially in the current global context for sustainable performance. There's no company nowadays can just stick to what they used to do 20 years ago and think, oh, we're still very successful. That's just impossible. And if we look at the whole international political landscape, is that learning actually now is manifested in multi-aspect. It's not just about learning to serve the market consumers, but also learning to understand how the changes in different markets in linked to your strategic options. So learning actually provides a very broad umbrella for us to start with. But if we look into the particular context of Chinese firms, the learning is even more important, right? Because it is embedded in the Chinese cultural tradition. So we emphasize a lot in contemporary Chinese management that learning is really needed to overcome the foreign liability, to transfer knowledge reciprocally between headquarters, subsidiaries, and also trying to learn how to acquire the foreign firms and to make sure the integration worked. Because most of the time, internationalization doesn't lead to success automatically. So there are lots of learning by doing, learning from failure, and learning from partners. So organizational learning theory really offers us a very good foundation to think about, these firms can acquire, can actually utilize knowledge to adapt and improve their performance over time. And then here, the organizational learning theory emphasizes a lot about this kind of intra-organizational learning process. So it's more about partnership, but it also could be the inter-organization context, within the organization and outside of the organization. So we argue that for effective Chinese multinational firms learning to take place, that the global mindset should have a role. And so that's why we try to actually integrate our key construct for the argument, how organizational learning need global mindset to work together. So we argue that this is the starting point to missionize the business, the strategy, and the operationalization of the learning intent for the Chinese companies. Because while they come from China or certain kinds of emerging market context, internationalization to most Chinese firms is a learning process where the outcome is quite uncertain. So what can be actually dependent is their own mindset, how and then where they want to be over the overseas market. So this is especially true in the case of Lenovo. When they acquired the PC division of IBM, because they had a very clear internationalization strategic view and saying we wanted to be or wanted to have a place in this kinds of PC computer globally. So this kinds of international, or we say global mindset, really set the tone for their operations, no matter its acquisitions or strategic alliances, or even their own investment abroad. And we also think it's very important to think about global mindset because it really helps to integrate diverse perspective within the organization. Because you do need to make sure when going outside, where lots of uncertainties are in place, you need to make sure you glue together organization members internally. So this is very important to understand where those kinds of message to be international excellence is clearly delivered and then transmitted within the organization. So this is very important to make sure that the organization members from top to the bottom, different divisions, different departments, they have the same goal to actually achieve the global aspiration, and then to make sure that individually and organization level, they can actually contribute to these innovation solutions and strategies. So by saying that, this actually leads naturally to our first main hypothesis, or we say underlying hypothesis, is that we do think a global mindset significantly influences learning outcome of a Chinese multinational firms. But that's not our particular interest because we're more interested about networking, as our research question suggested. We want to look into the networking, the two particular networking types. But let's start with networking. As I mentioned before, is the traditional network theory emphasizes a lot about, it offers a bridge, offers certain kinds of platform for foreign firms to engage in the host market. So the network theory talking about the power, talking about the networking house talking about different linkages the foreign firms can do, because they bring lots of benefits. They help the firms to be legitimate, because you're actually now part of their group. And it also offers knowledge exchange, because it really helps you to understand how local market needs, and then what the local consumers and partners you should work with. The network theory also emphasized a lot about dynamics of the networks as well, because it really changed from the setup, consolidation, and mature, but even actually you may go apart from your previous one and you have your new networks. But here that if we move the networks themselves, no matter is it strong ties or weak ties, we're talking particularly about networking. Then the networking really actually bring out those kinds of interconnectedness with your partners to actually deliver what your global mindset would like to achieve. So here that we're talking about two types of networking. The first one is about global networking through the company's global business ties. Okay, so okay, let me restart from the definition of the global networking. So the first type of global networking, we're talking about, how companies are connected across their global business ties. So that include your marketing channels, your business partners, your supply chains at a global level. Okay, now the second one is about interpersonal networking. So that we really look into the individual's personal relationship. So we're talking about the personal relationship that you can build within and outside organization. And we argued effective interpersonal networking really helped individuals to share knowledge, because lots of knowledge do actually have the embeddedness within individuals rather than organizations. So through this particular dimension, this networking really fosters a culture of continuous learning and knowledge exchange, and which is very essential for organizational growth and innovation. But back to the global networking, it's more about, when you are connected with the global partners, either in the non-market or the market actors, they really offer the knowledge, the rules of games, and then the support and other advantages to facilitate strategic learning and innovation development. And then one of the most important global networking is that when you are associated with the government or nonprofit bodies, you do actually understand how institution works. And this is especially true when you operate in emerging economies or global south, because those kinds of institutional framework could be very important in determining the success and operation overseas. So when we look into these two types of networking, and then we argue that Chinese firms are more likely to use those kinds of two channels, two mechanisms between their global mindset and learning outcome. So we propose the networking actually as a mediator for the global mindset and learning outcome relationship. So the hypothesis to look into the global networking itself to mediate the link, and while hypothesis 2B is to particularly look into the interpersonal networking. So I hope that's very clear. Then we also try to understand is because if we look at, the expansion of Chinese multinational firms in the past, we always argue, okay, could Chinese multinational firms a new, colony, because they enter especially in Africa and in less developed countries because they want to exploit resources. And this is no different from the previous imperialism and colonization. But at the same time, we also have seen that Chinese firms also enter the developed markets for different reasons. So there's quite a literature talking about different strategic motivation to go to the different markets. Then not lots of literature have really provide evidence about how these different locations really show And they are the platform for successful learning outcome and performance for Chinese firms. So that's why we want to look into whether location really matters in terms of learning outcome. And then basic argument is that emerging markets and the developed markets are quite different in terms of institutional voice, in terms of diversity in consumers, competitors, and networks. So it will be very naive that if Chinese firms want to go international and want to be very successful in international market, they use the same way. They actually use the same learning mechanism to actually do exactly the same thing between developed market and emerging market. So we do believe those kinds of differences among the type of markets actually affect the way how networking work and how global mindset can lead to the outcome. So there's some literature already talking about, Chinese firms do behave differently and depending on the environment they operate. So if we draw back from Law and Chang's work about Springboard, they did mention actually Chinese firms actually may seem more not comfortable, but adaptable and flexible when they enter the other emerging economies. And because similar findings actually were proposed by Gamatoft and his colleagues talking about the Chinese firm do have those kinds of capabilities. The ability to navigate weak institutions and manufacture products at lower cost and access networks through business groups, families, or government ties. Those kinds of capabilities really were brought up of their sophisticated and experience in operating in China in their home market. So this is what we often refer to, the home advantage, the home ownership advantage. So we would argue that the Chinese multinational firms, according to their literature, that when they expand to other emerging markets, the networking really helped to mitigate the challenges of weak institutional environments and reduce uncertainty related to enforcing political regulation changes or even the market dynamics. So this is quite different from the developed markets, because we would argue is that the developed markets may actually pose quite a challenge for Chinese multinational firms, especially in terms of the legitimacy, right? In terms of those kinds of hostile perspective from politicians or even from mass media or even to the local consumers. And take the case of Shein and Temu. While they actually aggressively enter the US and European markets, there were lots of negative report and the media coverage talking about the exploitation of laborers, the violation of human rights, so on and so forth. So we could see that when they enter the developed markets, to them, in order to mitigate those kinds of liability of foreignness and the Chineseness, they need to rely on the different channels in order to, be able to fulfill their global mindset. So that's why we try to propose that this host market type will moderate the indirect effect of global mindset and learning outcome via the two different types of networking. And we do not really propose very specifically about, which direction would we go, but it's very interesting later on when I share the results to you guys. So based on the hypothesis development, drawing upon the organizational learning theory and networking capability theory, that this is the theoretical framework which we looking into this line from global mindset to learning outcome. That's our hypothesis one. But when we have the hypothesis, we're talking about networking, the two types of networking, it should be global networking rather than, so it's a mistake. And I do apologize for that. So these two actually serve the mediator in order to make sure the global mindset really can deliver the learning outcomes. Then we have the hypothesis 2A and 2B to look into the moderating effect of the host market type, namely developed market versus emerging economies. We're looking learning outcome as the dependent variable, but we also control industry, the firm size, entry modes, and also their age, because we don't want them to intervene our results.
Yeah, Juan, can you go back to your framework? And I'm just curious. So why do you treat these host market types as a moderator? Basically, it's the interactive actor. Actually, okay, let me do this in another way around. I think host market types directly influence the relationship between global mindset and learning outcome. But in your framework, actually in your hypothesis, you actually consider the impact of these host market types through global networking.
Yeah, so I understand your point. Yeah, I understand your point, because to be honest, in IB research, we actually can, depending on the research question we want to see. So here, because the main idea is that we would like to see the global networking. So the main emphasis for us here is the networking actually lead to the different learning outcomes of a global mindset. But then because we have these two mechanisms of learning take place, then we would argue that the global networking and interpersonal networking may have a different effect on the learning outcome in developed markets versus emerging markets. So we would like to compare the differences between the two types of markets in terms of this. I agree with what you just mentioned, but our focus here is to look into the global networking. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So let me move to the methodology. Am I running time okay, or I'm a bit? Do I need to fasten up, speed up? Okay. Do let me know. So the methodology. So because we want to actually look into the learning outcome, and then it will be very difficult to find the secondary data, and so we went out for the survey. So we first look into who would we like to approach to. So what we did is to set a criteria about how we define Chinese multinational firms. We argue Chinese multinational firms should be literally, they have for the physical international operations overseas. So this actually departs from exporting as an entry strategy in the IB literature. So we do need those Chinese firms have their subsidiary overseas, and that's very important. And then we also need those Chinese firms with publicly available information so that we can cross-check the financial performance and the other data in terms of their profiles. So based on these two criteria, we actually draw from the data source about the bureau and then the thing that my partners actually dealt with. So the total sample frame actually is more than 1,000 companies that really stick to the two criteria that we set up. Then we use the two-stage data collection, because for all survey that we can draft the survey questions, but it's more important to run a pilot study on which we interviewed 12 experienced managers who are very familiar with their firm's international operations, because we would like to see the original scale items actually were accurate and were able to capture their international operations in reality. So this pilot interview actually helped us to modify the scale items based on their comments, and then try to reduce the ambiguity in terms of the wording, the phrases, and also the questions. Then the second stage, we undertake a large scale survey. So we sent out the information. So we use English measures because and that's how we draft it, but we translate it into Chinese and then verified by the expert in this field by back translation. So that all the normal procedure to ensure the translation accuracy. We use one key informant technique because this is one of our limitations, unfortunately, because it would be better to have a multiple respondent in order to reduce the common bias. But this is the best what we could do in our project. So we use the key respondent because normally they were senior managers, like I mentioned, like those who we interviewed. They had experience in international business and they had sufficient knowledge to answer the questions in the questionnaire. So we contacted target firms via email, telephone to identify who would be the right one before the survey. So it ended up that most informants are senior executives and managers in different divisions such as global operations, international business development, marketing and sales, and product managers. So we are pretty confident that they are the right targets and they are the people who can provide information as much as possible. So we sent out a questionnaire and cover letters, and then we also did follow-up letters and additional questionnaire to non-respondents 3 weeks after the first distribution. So in total, we received 208 usable questionnaire for final data analysis. So this actually resulting in an effective response rate, which is 34% 95, which is quite above the average about this kind of response in survey method. More than 68% respondents, we can see there, the table actually showed a profile of those sampled companies in our final data. So 68%, they actually have operated over 25 years. And so if we calculate all of them up, and then over 50 actually had annual sales volume exceeding 35 million US dollar, and over around 60% of firms actually have more than 1,000 employees. So they're pretty large in size, rather than actually small international players. So this really gives us certain kinds of view about, how they look like and how characteristics at corporate level that our data has. So to say a little bit more, but we can see here is that I did mention about control variables, but we also look into the independent variables and also mediating fact. Let me talk a little bit more about the scale measurement as well, because when we do the survey, we literally ask questions and ask our respondent to provide like a scale with the statement they believe accurately capture the situation or not. So we conceptualize global mindset as the firm's commitment and efforts on understanding global markets, international network, and opportunities to collaborate with global partners to be excellent and to be successful in international markets. So there are 4 items to measure the global mindset. And so, for example, we asked the question whether they do see the world as the firm's marketplace, and whether they really highlight the firm's mission to succeed in global markets within the organization, and whether they really allocate the organizational resources to achieve the firm's goals in global markets. So that's pretty much how we try to operationalize the mindset by asking those kinds of questions. For global networking, we actually talking about those kinds of engagement in networking activities in global markets to get information, generate ideas, and explore opportunities abroad. And so again, there are 4 items as well, looking into they use the networking to acquire resources and exploring global market opportunities and augmenting their technology know-how and generating ideas for product development. And interpersonal networking is pretty much about how they use the networks through social context-based relationship to facilitate business and information exchange. So this actually gives you guys an idea about how we measure the variables, and then we run the regression. So this table really shows the results of the hierarchical linear regression, which is no surprise to you guys. And I'm sure that finance people actually are more advanced in this kind of technique. So I do appreciate your comments to improve it. But overall, so the first model is that we do not enter anything, but it's more interesting to look into the model 2 because we just actually test the direct link between global mindset and learning outcomes. And then the results really support our hypothesis. So this is positive and significant direct effect. And then we actually look into the 2 mediators to test the mediating effect. So the result also show here, the direct link no longer significant. And then, but when we actually have the 2 mediators, they were included in the model that they have for the significant result, which means that back to our framework here, this is the full mediating model and the results supported to our study. Then we further use the Hayes process to look into the mediating mediation analysis to examine the hypothesis 2A and 2B. We want to actually see whether this mediating effect really, significant under condition of 5,000 bootstrap samples and our 95% bias corrected confidence interval. So this is how normally when we run the mediating effect, we try to look into this column and then see whether the mediating really actually show out. So if we look into the basic one is like we need to see whether the result really includes 0 in the bootstrapping here. So if we look at a full data sample, as I already highlight, that indirect effect, let me see. So it really shows that both the mediating effect actually are supported. Then we did a post-hoc analysis because we divide the sample size into 2 groups. Like we theoretically hypothesized that we want to see the developed market and emerging markets. So we want to see that the changes of mediating effects in the base model. So this is the full model, this is the base model. And then we would like to see how it looks like when we look into the subsamples between the developed markets and emerging markets. So the result in the group of the markets indicates that both indirect effect for global and interpersonal networking did not include 0. So that suggests this indirect effect between global mindset and learning outcomes, while these 2 types of networking are both positive and significant when Chinese multinational firms enter the developed market. That is to say, the networking both at the organizational level and the social individual level are very distinctive and significant in the developed markets. Then when we go to the emerging market, this is quite interesting, is like we could see the interpersonal networkings played a more important role. So here is like the global networking was not significant when the emerging market firms enter emerging markets. And this actually gives us some idea about, who you would like to line up with for learning and then whether they really contribute to learning. So we then further to try to look into the process model 14 to test the moderated mediating effect. So we literally look into the whole framework that I showed you guys before, because we try to test the moderated mediating effect in H3A and H3B. And then again, we also want to test the differences between the developed market and also emerging markets. So that's why there's a particular index of the moderating mediating results to show whether the difference within the developed market and the emerging market in terms of the global networking make a difference or not. So what our results shows that the different market type do have the different conditional indirect effect result. So in the developed markets, that it was significant, but not in the group of the developed markets. And then the index of moderating, mediating for the second moderate, it is from GM, and this is a global mindset through interpersonal networking, and in terms of the market type to the final learning outcome. This particular line actually was, I think, was significant in both groups. But then if we look into the difference between the developed markets and emerging market, actually, it was not significant, which means that the two different types did not vary significantly. So this result actually did not really provide the evidence for our H3B, and back to the previous one. I hope that's clear. So let me think about the key takeaways. So basically, this research is that we're trying to understand how and why different types of networking can lead to better performance outcomes, such as learning and innovation. So that's why we're looking into, how, first thing is that how networking through organizational level and interpersonal level actually show. And then we're also looking into how the two types of markets actually see the different directions and the different channels of that one. So based on the results of the regressions that we could see, global mindset really lead to learning outcomes. So which indicate that if the Chinese firms go abroad, they should have a very clear and a very strong ambition that they want to be globally outstanding. Because without this kind of global mindset, without communication within the organization and outside the market, they really need to have it, let's put it this way. Then if we're looking to, the mediating effect is like I said, global mindset doesn't automatically lead to the outcome. It really needs particular mechanisms for them to fulfill and to make sure that they can be delivered. And our research shows that it is through the global and interpersonal networking mechanism. And then that's a particular true for especially when they enter developed markets. So this is very interesting because normally we would think about in the developed market, everything's, sophisticated. There's not particular institutional voice like the emerging market. So we should play in a more formal way, right? We should be actually according to the rules of the game and then do the business at organizational level. No, our results are showing this kind of interpersonal networking is still very important. And that actually helped them to actually navigate certain kinds of misunderstanding or information asymmetry between the developed markets and emerging economy context. So that's why it's quite likely that when multinational firms, or especially the latecomers, enter the developed markets, they really need to do both, and they have to do both strongly. If we look at the emerging economy firms into the emerging markets, then it's no surprise that interpersonal networking emphasized a lot and then utilized a lot because I think that also relates to the institutional and also the transparency of the market may not be there yet. So this kind of a social network, you find the right partner in the local market really help you to mitigate lots of uncertainties and risks, and to help you to find the easy way to operate domestically and to understand what you need to learn and in a more effective way. So The fourth takeaway is about the firm's global mindset enhance their learning outcomes through the indirect effect in personal networking, regardless of market type. And so this is what we find interpersonal networking actually are significant in both of the settings, and in addition to our full sample. So that's actually something we still argue that we do business because we actually do business with people. So this is also one of the philosophy of lots of Chinese multinational firms go outside, is that they keep people as the basis, as foundation, and within the organization and with their relationship to other organizations and other actors in the non-market setting. So the last takeaway is that we argue the global networking with external partners actually plays a more important role in fostering the link between the global mindset and learning outcomes in developed markets. So that means that there should be a fit between the strategy and vision and also the structure, because you can't just rely on the interpersonal relationship. You also need to have this kind of global networking capability and linkages in order to make sure that you can be more innovative when competing with sophisticated counterparts in developed markets. So that's pretty much about it, but we do acknowledge lots of limitations associated with this research, and we argue that there's more platform for us to go ahead. Looking into the context, we're particularly looking into Chinese multinational firms, but there could be other contexts in global south, because it's not just Chinese multinational firms. We have seen successful emerging economy firms now operating in global markets. So the context itself really going to be a very interesting outlook to try to compare the influence of global mindset on firms' international growth. So I would see that one of the paper from Global Strategy Journal to look into Indian firms, and they talk a lot about they are successful overseas because they learn a lot domestically. But whether they really have as strong, as ambitious as the Chinese firms that this study have, this really requires a further investigation. Survey data actually is quite problematic if we really dig deeper. And so that's why we receive lots of comments and valuable ideas regarding how we can mitigate cross-sectional data. So one of the ways is to have multiple informants, like I mentioned before, but unfortunately we just have one key informant. But at the same time is that cross-sectional data could be better complemented by longitudinal data. So the qualitative investigation and case study might actually add more insights and then more rich in evidence and to understand the dynamic process of internationalization over time. But that requires lots of effort and time and also coordination from the scholar perspective. But we definitely need to try to work on that way. The global mindset as one of the key constructs in this particular paper, as we reviewed and as we try to operationalize it, there's still kinds like room for us to improve it. Because we talk about individual level and also the organizational level, but we do not really try to differentiate because we think it's a multi-level concept, but then we may need to actually integrate more perspective into understanding how global mindset really captures. So for example, the micro foundation level is how this individuals really think about it, right? Because this is something that we didn't manage to capture it in our questions. And also take a step back is like, what affects global mindset? That would be very interesting. It could be about the history, or it could be the organization, or it could be even the pressure from the market. So this is something I think really invites us for future research. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you all for your attention. And I would really like to get your comments and questions, and I'll try my best to answer them.
Yeah. Very good presentation, Huan. And Juan, you probably can take off. I do not know. I cannot see other people. If you close your slides.
Okay, let me see.
Let's see whether I can get that page. So why do I not see? Okay. So this is the thing. So you closed it. So I particularly like
I'll stop sharing, right?
the way that you talked about the story. So I think that is at the deep level, and so it contains a lot of reasoning. So this is something that I think we have learned from your presentation. And I know people have different questions, but I'm thinking. So the Chinese enterprise, multinational enterprises have entered into international market, let's say 20 years ago. So as compared to the beginning of the emerging market multinationals and the emerging market multinationals now, do you see your paper applies across the different stages?
Yeah, that's what I think that's a very valid question, because when we're talking about previous focus of for studies, people were more interested in understanding why they go international, right? So it's more about, the motivation, those kind of determinants that either push or pull their international expansion. But like you said, Chinese firms, together with other emerging economy firms, they have already operated for more than 20 years, right? Even if we look at Global Fortune 500, the State Grid and also the Bank of China, they're already on the list for more than 20 years. So this definitely says something, because if we want to look into how they perform, so we actually take a more actually near to our time to consider about after long times of presence in the global market, how they really do things. Because some of them may not perform that well. Some may actually become the leader and then, changing their status as latecomers. So it would be interesting if we do have all this longitudinal level to look into the different stage and different phases. And we definitely can see something. But this paper, we actually look into how they perform rather than compare, what they initially perform in their early days of internationalization. So all the financial and also the performance is actually by the time and we asked the respondent to do the survey to reflect on their performance and more lately rather than actually dated back. And also if we ask them dated back to say, was the performance of your first 3 years, they would not be able to answer, to be honest. And then, but it would be very interesting to have the comparative perspective. But again, when we look into the descriptive statistic, is that the majority, 2/3 of the firms, have been operating for more than 25 years in the market. So that really says a lot about, how mature they have become the international player, and rather than being totally a new entrant, a new competitor to the market. Yeah.
So that's that one. Nice. And also, I was thinking, because your networking is so important in your story, so I think you mentioned a little bit about how you measure the global networking, and you also emphasized that interpersonal networking is so important, particularly in emerging market. So I mean both, but so how did you measure this interpersonal networking? So what do you mean by that? What kind of activities when you ask them?
Yeah. So like I said, global networking and interpersonal networking or networks or linkages. So we kind of like exchange the labeling whatsoever. But here is that we argue networking different from network or linkages because they need to deliver something, right? So it's more about I utilize those kinds of networks to get something out of it. So when we measure global networking, we're talking about, the global networks to seek resources we need. And then we're talking about identify and explore international market opportunities. And we're talking about we use the global network to, enhance our technology know-hows and also to generate ideas for product development. So this global networking actually is different from, who we are partnered with, more about, when we partner with our global partners, what we would like to get out from them or what we can benefit, from these kinds of networks. So it is the same case with interpersonal networking because, we emphasize a lot because this is going to be at a level or, dimension of individuals, right? So we do not need to argue who we would like to or what particular type of individuals. So we're more thinking about we use this individual relationship to develop our local connections. And then to think about we actually have the local connections with our business partners, have the individual relationship to work with political partners to get the information about policies. And then we also actually try to make sure we sustain and take care of the partners through the interpersonal relationship. So I would like to make this is quite clear that it's quite different from what the other paper is talking about, global networks or individual networks. But here is more about networking to be beneficial for their learning.
Yeah. And so that means, so your data actually, at the end of the day, when you use them in your regression analysis, they are all dummy variables, are they?
No, they are like a scale. So what we did, so they're like a scale. So we have the factor loading. So it's a factor analysis to manage and then to clean the data. And then after factor loading, so because we have more than 4 questions in our original, but it just the final factor loading means these 4 questions actually best serve the purpose because they have for their the what we call the CA and the CR variables. So they actually entered into the final analysis as the variable.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So any other questions from our friends here, colleagues? Interesting. So so Huan, I think there is an endogeneity problem here. And I do not know whether you noticed that, but to me, immediately it will come up. So also, I think it can be, I do not know if you focus on the theorizing, is that a kind of new theory or what do you think?
No, I don't think it's that we totally build up a new theory because like I mentioned that we draw upon organizational learning and networking theory because both of them are very, very, established in strategy and international business. But I think interesting point here is that we use the global mindset because this people will say, okay, what's the difference between global mindset and, the strategic motivation, right? Because strategic motivation had to be talked a lot regarding the question why Chinese firms go international, but not lots of first studies so far as we acknowledge talking about to the performance of it or to the learning outcome of it. So we actually build up this kind of global mindset concept to the learning outcome as the first place. Now, for the networking theory is that we would not say that, okay, we really, add a new layer of it, but we're looking into, these 2 very traditional way how we look into the network linkages, but they have a different roles. So not, because people will argue, yes, the Chinese firms will be performing like the way how the counterparts in the developed markets like Huawei, because they can't just do what they did in China, right? So they have to adhere to the regulations, rules of the games, and also the customers or whatsoever in the developed markets because they have to. But then we argue is that from our research, yes, it's true, but interpersonal relationship also matters a lot. And this is something most often overlooked or ignored and when Chinese firms that go international. And even for practitioners, they may think, okay, we just need to go ahead with the regulations required and we tick all the boxes, that should be fine. No, that's not true. And you still need to actually try to be very smart in terms of how you manage the market and the non-market environments.
Yeah.
To your question about the heterogeneity, yes, that's true, because we can't verify the causal relationship because of the cross-sectional data. What we did actually, we used the process model as the mediator, but we also ran the different ways and to look into, that's called a structural equation model, is to look into. But fundamentally, we serialize it and in the way, because that's our focus, to look into the global mindset and learning outcome. But I definitely take your point, and also we acknowledge that as one of our limitations in our paper. So
no, but that's the purpose of I asked that theorizing question. I think you can do more on theorizing, and so that the empirical can be a little bit, just to like an illustration. So I saw a lot of names here. Do we have any questions or comments on Huan's paper and presentation? Very quiet. Yeah.
I have to admit, this is really
it's a little
conventional
topic of different but that's a nice one. I liked it. So thank you very much, Huan. So in that case, I would say, Huan, do you want to just have one sentence before I close?
No, I mean that I do say, I'm afraid that this is not really the topic that everyone might have some interest in, but what I think is that there's something, apart from this research, that I'm also looking into the Chinese firms in Africa. So then this actually, the paper really gives us some understanding of, what kinds of key aspects we can look into in terms of their social structure and organizational structure. And I understand that lots of colleagues here also looking into the development and the investment in Africa. So I think we definitely can, dig deeper and explore in more details about dynamics of the Chinese investment overseas.
Great. Thank you so much, Huan. So if there are no questions, comments, and thanks for people here for your time, for your participation. So in that case, I will close this session so we can have discussions offline. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Huan. See you later. Bye.